Hello, knowledge seekers. In this episode of 20-Minute Books, we dive into Can't Even by Helen Petersen, an insightful exploration into the misunderstood world of millennials, defending a demographic often labeled with notions of entitlement and laziness. Petersen argues that the chronic exhaustion and burnout experienced by this generation are direct outcomes of inheriting a world fraught with economic and social instability. Helen Petersen holds the mantle of an accomplished American writer and journalist. Prior to authoring Can't Even, she made her mark as a senior culture writer for BuzzFeed and penned celebrated works such as Scandals of Classic Hollywood and Too Fat, Too Slutty, Too Loud, The Rise and Reign of the Unruly Woman. This book is a crucial read for millennials navigating the complexities of burnout, as well as their friends and relatives seeking to understand the challenges faced by this generation. Moreover, it is an important work for anyone interested in shedding light on the transformative and often problematic shifts within the modern workplace. Join us as we unpack the nuances of a generation's struggle and their resilience in the face of adversity. Can't Even: How Millennials Became the Burnout Generation. Introduction: The Millennial Predicament: Understanding a Generational Crisis. Millennials. They're often stamped with stereotypes like avocado toast enthusiasts, selfie experts, and seekers of instant gratification. But these quips and jibes from an older generation miss a critical point. The millennials are wading through a uniquely challenging era. They encounter accusations of entitlement, but in the backdrop of this, there's a deeper story unfolding, one of systemic issues leading to what's termed as millennial burnout. Let's get to the heart of the matter. Countless think pieces and opinion columns have dissected millennials' habits and choices, pinning down the erosion of traditional values to their apparently insouciant lifestyle. However, the problem isn't rooted in their breakfast choices or social media usage. The crux isn't whimsy, it's weariness. The societal deck as it's currently stacked seems to have dealt this generation a particularly tough hand to play. The plight of millennials springs not from a lack of virtue or effort, but rather from a world that's not playing fair. Economic instability, the gig economy, the staggering cost of education, and the pressure to turn every passion into a hustle are just the tip of an iceberg that's grinding down the spirit of an entire generation. As we unpack this narrative, we'll explore why following your passion might be a misguiding creed, delve into the historical shifts that have transformed work culture since the 70s, and deconstruct the illusion of perks like free snacks in the modern workplace. Prepare to dive into a story that goes beyond the surface, examining the myriad forces at play that have redefined what it means to work, live, and strive as a millennial in a world that often seems to be stacked against them. Part 1. The Burnout Brew. Childhood comes with a schedule. Imagine a calendar filled to the brim, not with business meetings or doctor's appointments, but with piano lessons, soccer practice, and tutoring sessions. This isn't the agenda of a CEO, but rather a snapshot of a typical millennial childhood, intensely structured and closely monitored. Understanding this is key to grasping the roots of millennial burnout. The narrative of modern childhood is deeply intertwined with the socio-economic changes over the past few decades. We've witnessed a seismic shift in the way parents shepherd their children through their formative years, largely fueled by the anxiety of a future laden with economic precarity. Gone are the days of unsupervised exploration, replaced by a meticulously orchestrated symphony of extracurriculars designed to engineer the perfect adult in the making. Rising income disparity carved out a world where the laissez-faire childhoods of yore seemed a luxury too costly for success-hungry parents to afford. The ballad of life's race was being cast early, with parents doubling as both campaign managers and chief strategists, ensuring their offspring were chalked up to win. This shift portrays childhood not as a sandbox of freedom and discovery, but a battleground where every recital, every A grade, every trophy inched a child closer to a prosperous adulthood. The increased surveillance wasn't solely academically or athletically motivated. A cultural climate of fear, punctuated by sensational media coverage of child abductions, swept the nation in the 1980s. A generation of parents, spellbound by the specter of stranger danger, wrapped their children in cocoons of constant supervision. But the irony lay in the unintended consequences. These overprotected children, now grown-ups, grapple with the everyday of adulting, a term born out of their collective unease with the rigors of independence they weren't fully allowed to exercise as children. This is the portrait of a generation ushered into workspace hallways, still trailing the ghosts of their micromanaged past. The millennial inclination towards relentless productivity and perpetual self-betterment doesn't spring from thin air. It's the flame kindled in the crucible of highly regimented childhoods. It's a tale of side effects, where the prescribed treatment for staving off societal pitfalls inadvertently contributed to a chronic condition of burnout, leaving the question, could there have been another way? Part 2. Millennials College. Conundrum. Degrees don't pay off like they used to. For members of the millennial generation, myth and reality collided when it came to higher education. Raised on promises of upward mobility and assurance that college degrees paved golden roads, these young aspirants flocked to university halls in droves, armed with dreams and burdened by loans. The beacon of success, they were assured, lay just beyond the quad. Yet the return on that educational investment turned out to be less than advertised. The degree that was marketed as a ticket to security and prosperity increasingly resembled a scratch-off lottery card. For far too many, the winnings were modest, or worse, non-existent. A harsh reality faced the fresh graduates as they strode across the stage. Degree inflation had diluted their hard-earned qualifications. Whereas once a bachelor's degree might set one apart in the job market, it had now become the baseline expectation. The dream job envisioned in youth seemed out of reach unless one's diploma was burnished with the prestige of ivy-clad walls. Desperately seeking distinction, many millennials furthered their educational careers, hoping master's degrees and even PhDs would catapult them into the few coveted positions that beckoned. But the higher they climbed the academic ladder, the heavier the burden of debt became, and for many, the promised land of career satisfaction remained a mirage. There was, however, no shortage of lucrative opportunities outside the college path. Skilled tradespeople often commanded the marketplace on their terms. But this was a path less walked, quietly overshadowed by the societal chorus championing academia as the one true way. Wrestling with a system that spun their efforts into diminishing returns, millennials doubled down on the only ethos they knew: to work harder, reinvent continuously, and strive unceasingly. The prospect of questioning the system, shaking the foundations that seemed to renege on their end of the grand bargain, remained a road less considered. Millennials, bearing the traits of their meticulous upbringing, turned inward, shouldering the blame and girding themselves for a Sisyphean push into an economic uphill that seemed to steepen with every step. Part 3. The Pitfalls of Passion, when loving your job costs more than it pays. Imagine a world where every office is a playground, and every task a calling. A world where work is not just work, but a fiery passion that stirs the soul. This is the dream sold to the millennial workforce, a promise that feels within reach until the harsh whispers of exploitation begin to echo. The concept of dream jobs, glowing with the allure of personal fulfillment, can actually become a gilded cage. Find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life. This mantra, a siren song to the purpose-driven millennial worker, carries with it a sting in the tail, immersed in industries saturated with hopefuls aching for meaningful work. Be it the arts, journalism, or technology, too many find themselves racing to the bottom in a bid for the coveted title of the lucky few who made it. Here's the twist. Employers are wise to this pursuit of passion. They realize that enticing a workforce with promises of purpose rather than paychecks can often lead to acceptance of mediocre wages or even none at all, as long as the workers feel connected to something grander than the profit motive. Why shower your passion-fueled workforce with benefits when a pittance and some peppery job titles, think rock star, wizard, or guru, can elicit just enough enthusiasm to keep the engine running? But millennials are beginning to recognize the treacherous terrain of the passion principle. Many are veering away from whimsical pursuits that promise joy yet deliver exploitation, steering instead toward a time-tested approach to work. Like their ancestors before them, they seek out jobs that provide stability and fair compensation, ensuring their passions are funded by their paychecks, not devoured by them. This isn't settling for less. This is settling smart. By redefining success not as a labor of love, but as the ability to live well, millennials are crafting a new narrative, one where work serves life, not the other way around. A narrative that echoes the practical wisdom of the plowmen rather than the pipe dreams of the professional pundits. The tide is turning, and with it, the notion of passion is being reframed from a professional prerequisite to a personal prerogative, held separate from the world of wages and wants. Part 4. Millennials and the Gig Economy. Navigating the Precarity of Modern Work. Turn back the clock to the 1970s, and you'll find the genesis of a modern labor phenomenon, the Kelly Girl. Part-time, temporary, and mostly free from the tangles of benefits and job security, these workers were lauded as flexible solutions in an age of economic flux. Flash forward to now, and the echoes of this past are vivid in the gig economy, where millennials, the new Kelly girls, face the reality of precarious work as a daily norm. In the last lap of the 20th century, as the gig economy gathered steam, the job landscape underwent a seismic transformation. Powerful tides of political change swept away the stronghold of unions and, in their wake, left a burgeoning freelance workforce adrift without the bulwark of worker protections. Swiftly, a horizon of outsourcing and contract work cropped up, pulling the rug of security from under workers who now saw job stability as a mirage in the desert of employment opportunities. Caught in the current are millennials, a generation typified by Uber rides and side hustles, embodying the very essence of the precariat. A social class defined by the uncertainty and irregularity that tempers their work lives. Seeped in the ethos of the gig economy, they find themselves trapped in a cycle of temporary gigs, sometimes the creative free spirit, sometimes the adjunct educator, always chasing the next job without the safety net of substantial benefits or the simple assurance everyday employment once provided. Times weren't always skewed so. There was an era when loyalty to a company implied a bilateral commitment. Climb the corporate ladder, and the rungs would solidify underfoot, propping up an edifice of healthcare, pensions, and paid time off. However, for today's millennial workforce, such relics of the past are distant, often unattainable luxuries. Millennial discontent isn't just a symptom of entitled longing. It's an environmental response to a transformed habitat of work. To redirect this course, a clarion call for legislative change rings out, one that obligates entities which profit from the gig economy to recognize their workforce as more than mere temps. The latter-day Kelly girls, the cohort of millennials navigating this economy, continue to seek the sanctum once offered by stable employment, hoping for a pendulum swing that brings back not only job security, but also the peace of mind that accompanies it. Part 5. The Inescapable Workplace. Millennials caught in a cycle of overwork. Today's office landscape is a terrain of perennial presence, where leaving work at quitting time has become an archaic concept. The emergent culture of the modern workspace is no longer etched in 9 to 5, but painted over with the broad brushstrokes of continuous engagement. It's a systematic blurring of work-life boundaries, and at the heart of this evolution lies a generation bearing the weight, the millennials. The workplace lures with its siren call of camaraderie and comfort. A foosball table here, a 24/7 pantry there, perhaps the occasional catered lunch, all suggestive of an environment that blurs the distinction between professional obligation and personal sanctuary. Yet this seemingly benevolent blend comes at a price: the tethering of employee to employer, the office not just as a place to work, but a place to inhabit, a second home of sorts. But let's trace back to where this story of occupational omnipresence finds its roots. Investment banks emerged as early pioneers of this overworking ethos. As anthropologist Karen Ho reveals in her incisive exploration, the schematic of perks within these financial institutions engineered an environment where late hours morphed from burden to badge of honor. A free evening meal here, a complimentary taxi ride home there, tokens designed to make excessive hours seem not just bearable, but desirable. It's a seductive deal for the bankers, whose income is often directly proportional to their billable hours. The longer they toil, the greater the potential for those eye-watering bonuses. But for the broader swath of millennials, who find themselves navigating a work landscape that increasingly expects an always-on mentality without the promise of lucrative compensation, the perks become a paltry consolation. The millennial workforce enters a daily marathon with no finish line in sight, sustained by a professional narrative that equates relentless labor with loyalty and success. Despite often stagnant wages and the dearth of proportional financial rewards, they clock in lengthening hours partly out of necessity and partly out of an ingrained belief that there is simply no alternative. Millennials are paying an exorbitant emotional and physical toll for the modern workplace's stay longer, work harder dictum. The overflowing snack bar becomes a subtle shackle binding them to their desks, as the battle to reinstate clear work-life boundaries rages in the background, a testament to the transformative yet taxing realities of a generation's work life. Part 6. Digital Drain. How constant connectivity fatigues the millennial generation. After a marathon workday that stretches deep into the evening, one might picture the ideal unwinding: a serene moment with a book in hand, piano melodies flowing, or perhaps the rhythmic bounce of a basketball under the stars. But for a generation entwined with the threads of technology, reprieve more often comes in the glow of a handheld screen. The tale is familiar. The millennial with phone in hand, thumb scrolling almost autonomously through a sea of curated lives beaming out from Instagram. Those snapshots once charmed with their simplicity but have morphed into a glossy parade of meticulously crafted perfection, inviting comparison and stirring unease. Here's a bitter truth: the millennial engagement with tech, once lauded for its connective prowess, has become a harbinger of fatigue. Far from being an exclusively leisurely pursuit, the foray into social media demands a currency of emotional labor, one that wears away at the spirit in subtle yet continual increments. Beyond the curated enchantment of feeds lies the relentless surge of news cascading through the likes of Twitter, a barrage of updates that pivot from the impactful to the tragic. It's a digital deluge of climate emergencies, social injustice, and political uproar, pressing down with a weight that begs attention and often action. In a world where keeping abreast of global happenings is a mixed badge of responsibility and burden, the engagement with the current affairs of strife can be overwhelmingly distressing. The yearning to be informed, to bear witness even when powerless to mend, piles onto an already substantial mire of stresses that besiege the millennial day-to-day. From the quicksand of work precarity to the looming mountain ranges of student debt, life already extends a smorgasbord of challenges to this generation in spades. The continual tug of notifications adds yet another vector of exhaustion, a digital tether that reminds of all that is dire with fleeting respite. To recognize the toll of this perpetual connectedness is to acknowledge the necessity for digital detoxes, moments of conscious disconnection where the world's weight can slip momentarily, allowing for a breath, a pause, a realignment of one's emotional and mental resilience. In stepping back from technology, even fleetingly, the millennial generation might reclaim some of the precious peace it has unconsciously ceded. Final summary. The millennial narrative is often misread through a lens of stereotypes and misconceptions. Pigeonholed as entitled and inept, what eludes many is the reality of their plight, a composite of systemic pressures and generational challenges that has left them adrift in uncharted waters. The bricks of this predicament were laid early on. Hyper-managed childhoods, dictated by dreams of upward mobility and insurance against a stratified economy, set the stage. The insistence on educational attainment bred a generation caged by crippling debt, as they were sold the illusion of degrees as golden tickets to stability. Alongside this, the workplace transformed, trading tenured positions for project-based gigs, grounding the precariat firmly in millennial lexicon. Somewhere between clocking exhaustive hours in the office and tabbing through another social media feed after midnight, millennials found themselves in the throes of burnout. The sheen of office perks faded away, revealing an expectation of round-the-clock dedication without the solvent recompense traditionally afforded to previous generations. Meanwhile, the ceaseless barrage of online connectivity has provided no sanctuary, tethering them to a reality of unrelenting demands. The prognosis reads less like entitlement and more like exhaustion. When the convergence of societal shifts, economic volatility, and digital overload collides, it gives rise to something pervasive, a burnout that has come to define a generation not by choice, but by circumstance. As we dissect their condition, one truth emerges unequivocally. Millennials are less a generation that wants it all, and more one that's weathering a storm, hoping to come out on the other side still intact. Thank you for joining me today on this journey of learning and discovery as we explored the insights of another thought-provoking book in our growing library of knowledge. If you've enjoyed our time together, please take a moment to follow our podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and share 20-minute books with other knowledge seekers. Your support truly means a lot. Don't forget to join me again in the next episode, where we will delve into another enriching book. Until then, happy reading and happy listening.